In a world filled with conflict, in a universe comprised of differences, there's one thing that absolutely everything shares in common. We all exist. Including two guys named Jack and Michael, who like to chat about that very thing over a good cup of coffee. Let's pay them a visit, shall we?
Existence Brewing.
Oh, yes. I made it before Jack Hansen. I make it before him a lot of times. I just like to sit here and people watch.
But not today.
Oh, there he is.
Already.
There he is. I didn't see you sitting over there.
No, I decided to spy on you today.
Oh, okay.
I've been watching a lot of movies that are very cloak and dagger. Actually, my girlfriend's been on a serial killer kick recently, which I have to say I'm not entirely enjoying. Like, I can fill my brain up with a little bit of that stuff, but I don't want a lot of it. But, man, she's just binging right now. I mean, and it's everything. First it was the hard, like, documentaries with Gacy and Dahmer, and then now it's Hannibal Lecter, the movies, and I told her last night, I'm like, honey, I don't know how much more serial killing I can take. Can we switch to something that's perhaps the diametric opposition of this for a few nights, maybe Fame or Shampoo, something that's just raucously gay and gleeful, like just please, or just a night or two until I can reload here. I mean, I'm having nightmares. So.
Why don't you just tell her what I told you?
What did you tell me?
Which is, you're probably like 2 clicks away from becoming a serial killer if you look at the...
What?
Well, you have an above average IQ. You
don't know that. We've never measured my IQ.
Yeah, but you don't like people sometimes. I just think you should probably lay that on her at some point, that you're probably about 2 clicks away from being a serial killer at any moment. So
where the hell is this coming from? Now, listen, I'm an egalitarian to the core. I'm not entirely misanthropic. And, it's funny because when I was in middle school, I was very curious about knowing what my IQ was. And I had a couple of teachers that took very specific interests in me. Mr. West and Mr. Finley, I believe, were their names. And one of them, I want to say, after I mentioned this to them in passing, like, I really would love to take an IQ test. I want to know what that's all about. They arranged it through one of the school's, I don't know. I'd never seen the guy before. He was one of those guys that's like the comptroller. You never see them, but they're there in the institution somewhere. So this guy was like a school shrink or somebody like that. And for a whole week, I left one of my classes that was less important to the federal government standards, apparently, and I convened with him to take an IQ test. And so I remember one portion of it, we were going through these little pictograms, and you were supposed to pick out what was missing. And it was a picture of a guy, just remember the one, it was a picture of a guy holding an umbrella, and I said, well, the rain, of course. And that was like the only reaction the guy ever gave me. He just laughed at that. He said, oh, that's very good. I said, was that the right answer? He said, no, I can't tell you that. But he said, even if that wasn't the right answer, that was a really good answer. And I was like, oh, okay. So we get to the end of this week. And of course, I'm looking for the payoff. I'm like, all right, so what is middle school age Jack Hansen's IQ? And he said, oh, I won't be telling you what your IQ is. Just wanted to give you the experience of taking the test, so now you've had it. And I've always been left with 2 thoughts on him not giving me what my score was.
You were a guinea pig.
Either A, and I'm thinking more than likely A, it was quite average or very close to average, and he didn't want to disappoint me, knowing
or
that
your
I
parents who were the ones who
away
pushed
from being a serial killer already, right? At such a young age. Or B, it was like vastly superior to the general population, and he didn't want to inflate my already misanthropic ego any more than it already needed to be. So I don't know. So I was left with two thoughts on that. But anyway, I've taken an IQ test, but I did not get to find out the results of that. And now I would just be, the thing is now, because like average, well, like barely functioning without hurting yourself at least 2 or 3 times a day is like 75, I guess, or 80, like right in there. Like adults IQ is pretty much 70 to 75, like right in there. Like I've had in-laws before that have had that IQ level, I think. So I think the average IQ is about 85 to 100, right in there. And somebody that's really good at Jeopardy might rock a 105, a 110. I think that's right. So, by today's standards, you could have like an 88, 92 IQ right in there and be a friggin' genius. You could be like a porn star with a 12-inch pianist. And, by all standards, because it's just like people are so just not, I don't know if they're not intelligent. They're just lacking critical thinking. Again, we've gone over this in the podcast and we'll continue to do it because the central theme of my aggravation, people are sheep. They don't have a way to think for themselves. And see, that's what I'm looking for. I love it when people disagree with me wholeheartedly, actually, but it's clear that they've vetted all of their thoughts, that these thoughts come from something we might call themself, and they're not influenced heavily by some book that they've read or some pastor that they've listened to or some guru that they've read about or watched online or some TikTok influencer. It's literally their interpretation of what is correct or what they feel, what they feel or what they think. So anyway.
Intellectual quotients are a difficult thing to gauge, and anything above a 144 is highly gifted. This is according to the IQ classification scale. Yeah. 130 to 144 is just gifted. And then,
Can you imagine that Hallmark card?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're just plain gifted, you fucker. You freaking run-of-the-mill gifted ass.
Oh, no, it gets better.
130.
It gets better. So 115 to 129 is above average. 85 to 144 is average, with 100 being the average.
85 to 144? Wait a minute.
Or no. 114, sorry.
Okay,
if I misspoke.
85 to 114. Yeah, so I was right. I was in the ballpark there.
And then 70, okay, so this is where it gets funny. 70 to 84 is below average, but then below 70 is called lower extreme.
Oh, well, I've known some lower extremers in my life.
Haven't we all?
Put it that way. We can go out in the world and find them every single day by the dozens. And like I said, I don't think it's a lack of paying attention in school. I really don't. I don't think it has to do with intelligence as we measure it so much as it has to do with, maybe that's where critical thinking spawns from, though, is just the exposure to things to retain and then recall. And once you have so much of that catalog, you can't help but your super processor that is your brain goes to work, and your cortexes just go, okay, we're going to critically think. But I've also known some people that were exceedingly intelligent, far more book smart, as you would say, than me. And they were sheep just the same. They were led around by political philosophies and ideologies of different social natures, and they believed in certain government and religion, theological stuff. And they were told, and they couldn't put it through the funnel. So I don't know. That's a good question. Where does that filter come from?
Yeah, intellectual quotients are tough to really put a number or gauge on. And I think you're right. There's a difference between somebody who might have a high IQ, but then maybe has a low social acuity. And so in social settings, they might appear to be really dense when really there's just a lot going on behind the scenes that you're unaware of. And yeah, no, you're right. It is kind of a fascinating thing. Quick story. When I was in middle school, I was a real cut up. I mean, to the point where my mom had gotten to her wit's end, and she was ready to send me to military school. In fact, I believe those were the words that often came up when I wasn't doing well in school, which was, "You're going to military school." One of the things that she did was, in all of her wisdom, decided to get the school counselor involved, probably coming from the same department as your man behind the scenes. And he put me in a room with this test, and I think it was like a multi-day test. I had to like come back, and it was kind of intense for being in the 7th grade. And I want to say that about halfway through the second day, they just said stop. And at some point, I saw somewhere in the notes as like the results, because my mom was real hell-bent on getting the results, because I think she thought I might have been a lower extreme. And so she wanted to know, why is he not listening and paying attention? And it literally, I think in the notes said, well, he's figured out the test, and don't worry, he just, I guess, is manipulative.
So they gave you the lower extreme test. I love the word. I've not heard anybody referred to as a cut-up, self or otherwise, in like 2 decades. That's awesome. I love it. A cut-up.
I had older parents, so that was a word they used a lot.
I'm thinking these same tests, this is the deal today. You give 100 kids this test, and when you come to the portion where you stack the colored blocks that have numbers on them, 50% of the kids, you go back in the room, the numbers are stacked in the correct order.
Right.
So there's 50% of them right there. 20% of them, you come back in the room, the colors are in the right spectrum. The numbers may be off, but at least, they're the artists of the world. Then there's like the 1%.
The lower extreme.
Then there's the 1% that did it like both ways. So the spectrum and the numbers are in the right order. Of course, how would you not get them both right? Listen to me, like do the logical deduction behind that right now. Anyway, then there's like the 1% that they're really looking for, the fire starters, and they come back in the room and the blocks are floating around by some kind of telekinetic suspension. And then the rest of them, they come back in the room and the kids are dead because they've choked on them.
Natural selection, right?
I think that's literally today's world. It's like 50%, they get the numbers right. Few of them get the colors right. 1%, it's some kind of like phenomenal rainbow crystal child gift thing. And the rest of them, they're dead. They choked on them. So.
Well, I brought up that story to just say that, he's not, rest assured, he's not the lower extreme. He's just figured it out. So what does that say about our education system?
You've never struck me as the lower extreme, Michael, because here's how I know, too. This is my litmus. You're still alive, and I hang around you. So, like, I can't tolerate the lower extreme for more than 7 seconds. I'm
like
a typical
the canary in the
I'm a typical person
mine.
with 5 air planets, that are just sitting there. So this conversation makes me think of someone that I know, and I won't say who it is because, I don't want to use names or even references of their relationship to me, but I love them dearly. And I would say they are probably, now it's possible I'm wrong, but I would say they are probably of the normal spectrum when it comes to IQ-based intelligence. I would say they're probably, maybe they don't have as much life experience as me because they're younger. Mm-hmm. But I would say that aside from that being a factor, they're probably of the same intelligence as myself. And I'm, of course, really dumbing myself down because I really don't think I have like that high of an IQ. I think I have my skills, my departments where I'm really savvy, but then the rest of me is just sort of, on average.
So they're in your tier.
But I will say this. I wish there were, and I think there is, but I don't want science to get a hold of it, of course, but I think we all can look at other people, and there is a test that all of us can actually somehow administer while we are getting to know somebody that isn't about measurable intelligence like an IQ test, but is about measurable wisdom. Mm-hmm. Because this person, for lacking their experience and, not saying that they're highly gifted or belong in Mensa, they are one of the most wise people that I've ever known in my whole life, and wise well beyond their years, wise in areas that I'm still a cut up in, quite frankly, at 51 years old. It's 51 turns around the sun. So again, to me, intelligence, nice. And as far as just basic functionality in the moving world, the physical world, not running into somebody, T-boning them at the light every other day because you shouldn't be operating a motor vehicle because you're a total dolt, or, not playing with fire and having a hot stove available in the house because you could burn the complex town that you live in. All those things aside, which are to some degree measurable, like we need, you need to be certain your machine needs to function to a certain level, I suppose, in order to keep you and the rest of the world safe from injury or hazard. But I think that you need to look at a person's wisdom, if that makes sense, more than anything else. And maybe wisdom isn't the best word, but I don't know. It's sort of an ineffable word, because what is it about people that truly define them as being good or bad at the end of the day?
Yeah.
And whatever that thing is that we'd call good, like Dark Helmet, evil will always triumph over good because good is dumb, which I just love. But I don't agree with it, obviously, in my waking world. But whatever that thing is that's good, I think we look to that, and we can bypass the fact that they're not going to run the category of Belarusian opera on Jeopardy and forgive them for that, because they're not a trivia master, but they are what you'd call a really quality soul. They're a really good person. You hear that all the time. They're a good person. They're a good guy or gal. So how do you look at that? How does one put on the optics to say this person's IQ is 92, but I don't care because I'm looking for somebody that knocks it out of the park a different way?
Yeah. How do you measure wisdom? How do you measure? Is that kind of along those lines as well?
Won't forgive the sports metaphor. Yeah. Because like I said, this person, and I've been called an old soul too. I had actually somebody that I saw years ago, a soothsayer, probably one of the many that I traipsed through, in my life to get this, that, or the other bit of wisdom on, and all I wound up with was bigger questions. They just told me something that made sense to me. They said, because I was going on and on about being so wise and, having these gifts and being in better contact with the universe. And I think I was feeling my oats universally, cosmically, more than I probably should have, needed to be humbled. And they said, well, you are an old soul, Jack, but keep in mind you're an old soul with a young spirit. And that also made, I think, perfect sense to me, because that sort of defines me pretty well. And that's this person too, in a lot of ways. But it gets me to thinking about the people that I've known in my life that have been very wise. And honestly, a lot of them weren't of vast intelligence. They certainly weren't, I don't think, at the extreme low levels or the lower extreme like we're talking about. They could stack the blocks in the right order, but they probably, the thing about the whole block test with them is they could figure out a way to describe to you why all of that wasn't necessary, why none of that really mattered. And that was their wisdom. The wisdom was that the blocks, they were very Yoda, the wisdom was that the blocks, what order they were stacked in only matters to us because we've made all that up.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what order. At the end of the day, no matter what order they're stacked in, or whether they get choked on or not, or even float around in the air telekinetically, everything is happening in the exact right time in the exact right place. That's sort of what these people possess, is this high master shit, this stuff like, God, they just know things, and they don't even know they know things, I think, sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think that's where I was going too, where it's like, well, we decided to cut the test short. Well, why? Because we think he's figured it out. Okay.
We're pretty sure he's okay, man.
We're pretty sure he's okay. And at this point, he's on to us.
What do you think about that? I mean, sort of not trading subjects, but sort of advancing on that theme. Because when I was in grade school, there was there was a during school. What am I saying? It was during school. They took us out of class for what would constitute like a period or two later on in school. But of course, grade school, you're just in one class all the time. In grade school, not too long after I got there, I spent first grade at a homeschool. It wasn't my mother. It was somebody else's homeschool because we got kicked out of the school that I was going to because my mother was awesome and she wasn't going to lie down and roll over for the school system. So
Of course
she said,
not.
fuck you. I'm taking little Jackie out of here. And he's going to this woman's. And it was a nice experience. It was a neat thing. So then when I got back to elementary school, I stayed at the same elementary from 2nd through 5th. And shortly after I got there, they placed me in this class for, you wouldn't say it was gifted people. I don't want to say that but it was kind of, the way I look back on it retrospectively, it was for kids that were a little bit more dreamy. It was for kids that were a little bit more artsy. It was for kids that were more advanced in their ability to articulate, more advanced. They were the writers and the poets and the, kind of those kids, I think, more than anything. And there were about 5 of us, as I recall. And my best friend was in there too. And I just remember it happened once or twice a week. And it, like I said, it went on for 4 years, 2nd through 5th grade. And I just remember every time that it would come around, I would have to get up. They called it UP is what it was called. These great names that the school districts comes up for these fucking things, UP. And so it was time for me to go to UP. Well, I would have to get up and leave class.
That's why they called it UP.
And I always remember the looks on the other kids' faces, though, and they would look at me with the greatest contempt sometimes and go, what the fuck makes you so goddamn special, Jack?
Yeah.
What is it about you that you get up and basically cut class? Because I'll tell you, this was a joke. I mean, we got visits that the other kids didn't get from really cool experts. We had a lawyer come. We had a skydiver come. I ate bear meat. Jesus, I ate bear meat. I didn't know any better, but they brought bear meat. There was the snake handler guy that came. I mean, Jesus, they brought in 3-fingered Jack from the local card room. Like, here you go. Here's how you make, and draw 4 aces on every flush. I mean, we had the best time in there. And most of the kids missed out on it. They were not allowed to be a part of this exclusive group. And I have since come to detest, retrospectively, my time in UP for that very reason. Because I am an egalitarian at heart, and I feel like, if some of those kids that for whatever reason that were judged to be just really banal were maybe exposed to a few of the things that we were given the opportunity to be exposed to as these higher functioning gifted types or whatever they thought, maybe they would have gone on to do even greater things than all of us did. Because I can tell you this, I haven't, by society's measure, I'm not a vast success. I know what several of the people that were in UP with me have gone on to do. One was in jail for a while, for God's sakes. So
it was the bear meat.
I don't like that exclusivity shit because to me, all people, not just kids, all people are literally one experience away from changing everything, from their whole life literally turning on a dime. And I believe that about the most hardened fucking criminals. I don't know what it is for all of them. It's a different flavor for all of them, but I truly believe that. I think there's a flavor in the ice cream case at the banquet of the universe that even the most hardened son of a bitch will walk up to, and if they pick that flavor and lick that cone, they go, holy shit, I got to change this. And I want to. I've been presented with a flavor that I want to lick. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And I think it also kind of goes to a really big topic, which is this kind of view of self. How do you view yourself, and how do you find yourself? And
what is self?
And what is self? And I think that in many ways, in retrospect, was that moment for me when I really started becoming curious about the world. And I knew I was curious before about the world, but when it came to traditional school, I really didn't work well in that system. And so then when it came to me going on to other things in higher education, I was able to then hone in on, this isn't just something that someone's trying to teach me. This is something that I'm learning and I'm curious about. And I think it happens for people at different ages as well. I think that for you, it happened at a very early age. And you were in one of those programs where they were like, oh, he has the ability, where most of the kids in your class probably didn't have that same kind of spark that you had, or that gift. They say gifted, right?
Well, but I will say this about Up. One of the things I was constantly told, both in Up and outside of Up, was that, Jack, you're not applying yourself. So one of the great of the great protests, one of the great holdouts that Jack has well been known for his whole life is he refuses to be institutionalized. This person that I either came in as mostly or tabula rasa wrote along the way just has a recalcitrant nature. I'm not going to join your club. I don't want to climb the ladder that's already built for me. If I'm going to climb a ladder, I'm going to build the fucking ladder myself. And I will do it when I'm good and ready to, and not any time before that. So, because I think at the end of the day, Up was probably just a covert government program that was looking for the next, nuclear physicists to create the thing that would blow up a big planet or something out in space for the military. I mean, who knows what they were doing it for? I just know that they were always amiss at why I had no interest in applying it to the practicalities that were already presented for me. Jack, you're not doing as well in school as you could with these letter grades. You're not applying yourself to math or science or any of these things that you're learning at this level. And it's like, yeah, what else you got?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm applying. Here's the thing. I'm not asleep at the wheel. I'm not failing school. I'm not ditching school. I'm there. I'm going. I'm present. I'm participating. But am I all in? As in, am I all in for what they want to shove me out the door to eventually do? No, that's not how Jack operates.
Well,
and again, I think that's where the big disconnect is with me and a lot of things. And I also think that's where the big hardship is for a lot of people. Quite frankly, not saying that I'm made any better, but I think a lot of people can't find the mettle to resist the system because they're so afraid of either failing as a part of it or having something happen to them that's not so good because they won't join it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And by the way, you knew that kid too that was the physicist that was going to blow up another world? Because I knew that kid.
That kid.
No, I think you're right, though. I mean, it really is just kind of part of a factory. It's like not to get too Pink Floyd and The Wall, but you're just another brick in the wall, right?
Sure.
And really, it's just a system that they've designed. And the thing that really, I think, was not very good for the teachers when I was younger, in my regard, was that I had a lot of exposure to dealing with adults, probably far more than most kids my age because my parents were a lot older. And so I don't really remember ever having kids in our house. I was the kid, but I was just another one of the people, the adults in the home as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, same here.
And somehow I think what I really did is I figured out that this person doesn't hold any authority over me. This is just their job. So they're literally just like babysitters, and they're here, stuck here just as much as I'm stuck here. And so then once I realized that, I was just like, okay, let's hold the facade for just a minute here. I'm going to be nice to you and I'm going to be respectful because if I don't, my parents will send me to military school. But I don't buy your crap for 1 minute.
Where you will learn to program the machines and be on the ground level when the bombs that the kids in Up created to drop on the next country that deserves it, because as George Carlin used to say, they have bigger dicks than we do. Backing up to this notion of self, too, this is such an interesting topic because I have been thinking about this more and more and contemplating what it means as I get older and older. And I'm not a big Forrest Gump guy. I think I've said this before on the podcast. I love Robert Zemeckis, and I love how he ends his movies especially. But the ending of Forrest Gump, I'm not sure I'm entirely there with. I'm more of a black and white guy because the whole thing about I think it's both. I think it's kind of a cop-out to say that it's both. I think that it's one or the other. I think it's either all completely random bullshit that's out of control and been spinning out of control wildly for billions and billions of immeasurable millennia. And it's going to, I guess, keep going on until it finally just implodes and the whole thing goes away. Or what I actually believe, which is it's an absolute freaking miracle. It's an absolute miracle from top to bottom. And it's so vast and it's so intricate per our human perception that we just can't believe that something this enormous and something that's filled with this many eccentricities and this many intricacies and this many nuances could be so perfect. It could just literally spin without a hitch constantly. So when I think about self in that, I kind of do the same thing. I say, well, I kind of do think there's a little bit of a few things we've talked about wrapped up in it. One of these was a while back, the notion of your purpose as opposed to your passion. And I think one of the things that happens to kids, and then we look at the model that's out there right now, because what does every kid want to be? They want to be a pop star. Nobody wants to be president anymore, so kudos on that. At least no kids grow up saying, I want to be president of the United States. Thank God they've gotten over that rubbish. But they want to be Taylor Swift. They want to be, Justin Bieber. Their music is big. And to me, that's a great driver. That's a great thing to want because it shows a passion in something that's truly miraculous. Music is fantastic. You're a music guy. I'm a music guy. Most of the world are music people. But we have to understand that this is where we start to flesh out the gifted, as it would be, as opposed to you didn't come in with a good set of pipes, and you can go to vocal class after vocal class and vocal class, and for whatever reason, you just aren't Pavarotti. You don't have it, kid, but music is still there for you to enjoy. So this is where the separation of the agony and the betrayal that so many people felt. You ever watch American Idol? God help us all.
Oh, yeah.
But when it was on the air, My ex-wife and I used to watch that show, and we could have cared less about who the next friggin' pop star that was manufactured by Coca-Cola was.
Or Simon Cowell.
I give a fuck about that. Yeah.
Right.
We watched the people that were desperate to be heard, that had no singing talent whatsoever, get wasted on by Simon Cowell, and then, Paula and Randy tried their best to just, save face, and this poor guy, Why was that? Why were we drawn to that? I think it's because of that mechanism. And most of these people just lack the understanding that, listen, this just isn't your path. It doesn't mean it can't be your passion. You can sing in the shower, in the car as much as possible, but in an applicable way in the industry of music, and fuck the industry too, by the way, who cares? You're lucky in some ways. You're getting to skip the pop star incarnation. But it really does, to me, speak about the separation of needing to understand that you have a purpose here to serve the rest of your fellow souls that are trying to live out a human life and do their best to help you at the same time, and you have a passion. And sometimes those two things meld, but I think it's rare. I think that you need to, as quickly as possible, and even with kids, I think you should do this. I don't know what age or anything. I'm not Dr. Spock, but I think it wouldn't hurt to do it early. Sit down and say, listen, you're going to be good at a few things in this lifetime. And those things that you recognize that you are just really proficient at, that you have a real proclivity for, that help other people, that is what you need to do with half of your time, kiddo. That is what you dedicate half of your time and energy to in this experience, because part of this is service. Part of this is service to others. Part of this is service to yourself, too. So along the way, know what your passions are, and regardless of what anybody says, follow them in the time that you're not serving others, and then learn how to balance the two. And this is spoken like a true person with Libra in the 10th house, of course, but I do really feel like that is something that might help the world in a very genuine way, because, I just feel like there's these things that we want to be these other people, and yet that's where the dislike of ourselves comes in. And because there are plenty of things I wish I could do that other people, that I can't do, that other people are very good at. But it doesn't mean I like myself any less for even a second. I like this Jack Hansen guy that's walking around pretty good. I mean, I don't know where he came from. I don't know. I do think it's Forrest Gump. I do think it's both. You write a little bit of this as you go along, and some of this you bring in with you. How can it not be if we believe in some kind of theory where we kind of get to do this again and again on some stage, then we'd have to bring some of the things that we have learned with us here for our next go around, and then also learn some new things that we could write. So,
that kind of gets a little bit into kind of the Eastern versus Western philosophies now, doesn't it?
Well, a little bit, because, the Eastern philosophies are all about reincarnation, and, they're all about sort of the notion that this thing we call the soul, whatever this spark is, does get to come back again and again and again. Certain wings of Eastern theology take it to extremes and say that we get a chance to be everything in this experience, from the lamp that's sitting on my desk at home to the chinch bug that's crawling around in some two-bit cesspool hotel in Orange County to, like the pharaoh of the Egyptian empire at one point in human form. I mean, some of them say you get to literally experience everything, and it is not until you have experienced literally everything that is experienceable within this whole matrix of existence, I guess, that you get to in some way ascend and become, I don't know, I guess some kind of a deity or something. But then others say that it's really more about a human experience. It's really about incarnating as a human over and over again.
Yeah.
Some say it's about incarnating at different points in the universe as one being or another, sentient or otherwise. So there's all kinds of theories. And then, of course, Western theology came along and sort of changed those rules and said, nah, it's really all about kind of getting to one static place where we all go and we experience this heaven for the rest of our lives and we don't have to come back. I don't know. I don't think that there's an answer. I think that you decide the answer. I think just like anything else, you decide where you want to go when you're done here. And I don't know why we have to kill each other over the notion that it's not possible for, again, all of us to lick a different flavor of ice cream cone when we're done here and be happy with it.
Yeah, and I was also kind of just referring mainly to the East versus West view of self and how Western philosophy typically looks at the self as this entity. While Eastern philosophy, Buddhism argues that the self is really just an illusion. It's a byproduct of a thought process. Where,
that's a very good point.
And so I think really where this kind of then starts to intersect is it this false sense of self, or is it, this, which is kind of this internal dialogue that is contributing to our suffering as humans, I guess you could say.
Yeah, the Easterners are really into the suffering, and that's a part of their philosophies that I don't really agree with, because one of the first rules is typically once you accept that most of life is suffering, then things get easier for you. But I don't think it has to be that way. I don't feel it doesn't mean that the experience has to be so rife with suffering, even though it is a hard and crude experience comparatively speaking to these other strata of incarnations, I guess, these other places that we can exist where we don't have these, as Yoda says, not this crude matter, that business. The thing about the illusion, I guess, of self, that's really a good point, though, too, bringing up the fact that it's the illusion of self. It reminds me of, there are some great NDE, near-death experience stories on YouTube. And one of my favorite ones involves this emergency tech, this EMT. I think he was a firefighter. And he was called out to some place during a big flu endemic that was going on. I think it was in California. This wasn't the pandemic. This was just a localized outbreak of a very vicious influenza that was going on, very virulent. So he winds up contracting this and goes to the hospital, doesn't even remember going to the hospital. He just remembers that he was at home. He was deathly ill after responding to this woman who was bleeding and had the flu, and apparently that's where he thinks he got it from. So he basically almost dies, for lack of any medical, terminology here. And he has this experience, and he describes it a lot like, and the experiencers describe these things very similarly. So there are a lot of things that tend to line up when you listen to all of them. One of them are the presence of these beings that are supposed to look like the little guys from Communion. the movie Communion, actually. It was all about Whitley Strieber and his experiences with extraterrestrials. But everybody says that's exactly what these guys in my near-death experience looked like, or a lot of them do. So he reported that, but he also reported this man, this presence. And it wasn't really a man. He appeared as a man, but he knew that it was much more than a man. He was just sort of putting on a mask for him so he could understand. And he came in and said, all right, I'm here, checking on you. And apparently this guy who was having the NDE said back to him, well, I want to look back at my life. Let's go over my life and talk about the things I did right, the things I did wrong. Because he was pretty sure he was in a place where he was checking in and it was time to check out. And he said the guy was he was filled with love and he had the biggest smile on his face and it never left him. And he just said, sure, okay, let's talk about that. Give us your best shot. And it was totally meaningless to him. It didn't matter at all. There were no judgments being made about what he'd done or not done in his life. But one of the things that I always remember that echoes in my brain, and I'll paraphrase it, but it's almost verbatim, I'm pretty sure, because I've remembered it, because I've watched this particular one several times because I like it so much. One of the things this NDE person said, this near-death experiencer, was he said of his identity in this experience, he said, so there I am, and it's kind of like he said the whole thing about floating above yourself that they talk about when you die at the scene of an accident, that old thing in the cartoons even where the angelic version of yourself would suddenly spawn out of the one that was lying dead in the street with a harpsichord and a halo over your head. He said it was like that, but he said, like, his name was Mark or something like that. I'm not sure what it was, but he said, yeah, I knew who this Mark guy was and what he'd done and what he was all about, and I wasn't interested in that at all. I wanted nothing to do with that guy. I was free of that guy. And he said, what's weird is I really liked that guy. I thought he was just like a really cool guy, but I wanted nothing to do with him. I was what I really am again, and I wanted to stay that. But this presence and these little communion beings basically said, that's not what we do right now with you. That's not your job. Your job is to go back in this particular form as Mark or whatever it was. And then he got the notion that, yeah, and when I'm finished, I'll come back as Joe or Phil or Ted or Sheila or Donna or whatever. And it just continues to play out that way. I always loved what he said about, I knew this person, like I could say the same thing. I knew this Jack guy and I liked him a lot, but I could have cared less about him. He was not important at that crossroads of my existential world. And so I always just thought that was the neatest thing, because to me, it speaks volumes about what I've also talked about on the podcast, which is what we fear about dying, which is losing that identity, because that's what we're hanging on to. No matter how much we might self-loathe even, we are just stuck on our identities here. We want to cling to them so desperately, in spite of our human bodies wearing out, in spite of these machines just having an expiration date for one reason or another. So, I think that says a lot about self. I mean, I think the Easterners may be onto something about self as far as the illusion of self, because I think to a large degree at the end of this experience, it is an illusion. But right now, it's the reality that we know, and it's here for a reason, and it's here for us to do with what we, A, want to, I suppose, and B, what we need to. And again, we go back to the split of self-pleasure, of that whole, this experience is mine. I'm going to do what Jack wants that makes Jack happy. I'm going to eat gobstoppers, and I'm going to stay up until 2 a.m, and I'm not going to take, shit from the boss. And okay, that's Jack being himself, pleasing himself. But then there's also this, Jack has a real notion for helping people when it comes to A, B, and C. And he needs to be out there helping people with A, B, and C, even if his boss is an ass, and that's where he belongs and he knows it. So I think self is woven in some strange way to the inconsequential nature of this whole human business.
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about that too, just in everyday life, where I kind of almost say, okay, is this myself talking or is this something else? And I kind of view the something else as a little more pure, but I almost feel like sometimes yourself can get in the way of an outcome that really is more favorable for the human existence, essentially.
That's the ego. that
Right.
is talked about in psychology. That's where the ego of scientific self comes in, is the notion that we have this ego that we take around like a membrane around us, and that our ego precedes ourselves everywhere that we go, and that some people's egos are, and we've known a few in the broadcasting medium, their egos are so vast, if they were made of anything solid, they'd never fit through a door. They'd literally just be sitting in Central Park the rest of their lives, and all the trees would be knocked down. I mean, that's how
you know
big.
that guy too?
Oh, yeah, we know that guy. We know a few of those guys, actually. And then there are some people that have such a regressive ego, they're literally such sycophants, or they're such a pushover that they just get derailed instantaneously.
Yeah.
So, again, psychology gives us that notion. And I think that we can play with both. I think we can actually take the Plato that Freud gave us and the Plato that the cosmologists and that the theologists of the ages have given us, and mix them together, and again, kind of come up with something that might make sense to us. But again, I'll give you, I just texted this earlier today to a friend. I had an experience that I won't share because it's going to make me sound like a male chauvinist pig, so I can't do that on the podcast.
We wouldn't want that.
But I was joking about that. But we were texting about this back and forth, and I just texted her this earlier today, and I think it plugs into right now pretty good. I'm not afraid of calling love, love, just like I don't fear calling God, God. Whatever it is, it's better to have it in my life than not. And this came off of her talking about her relationship. She's very cautious with the word love, and she's been hurt in several marriages, and she's found a man that she's very much in love with, and she's great friends with, and it's a very good relationship. But she's a realist in the sense that she knows that the relationship will end one way or another, because even if they stay together until one of them dies, one of them will die. And she's literally parked herself there. And it reminds me of what I've done, because I'm in this relationship with someone who's half my age, who I also just love fantastically, like I never thought was possible, and I'm best friends with. And so I parked myself there too, just thinking, well, this is over, even if it doesn't end before I get old and she runs away because I'm gray and, gnarled and everything, which, I'm still dead probably long before she is. We don't know that. See, that's the thing. We don't know that. And so it was unknown what prompted both my friend and I to get into our relationships. We just literally took a leap of faith. With the blindfold on, fully naked, we dove off the high dive. But now that we're in the waters below, we realize that what we worry about, which is the ending so consistently, our partners are bringing us into a place of now, which we have rarely lived in. Because one thing about Jack that is off, you might say, is that he is always living in a distant future where his actions there are ramifications for what he does now, but there's no living the now. So it's almost like, oh shit, I got Sheila Rogers pregnant at the prom, but I don't even remember the sex. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's a crude metaphor for saying that's kind of what the problem with Jack has been.
You're smelling the smoke before the fire.
Yeah, so this experience has really plunged me headlong into, you have no choice now but to appreciate right now. Again, we go Spaceballs. This is now. Not what's going to happen in 10 minutes or an hour or 2 months or 20 years down the road, because you've made this decision to actually be happy now, to be in a spot where you want to be now. And yes, there are some dangers to not having foresight. We need to have foresight. We need to avoid chaos and trouble in the future. There are ways we can do that. But we also, I think, if you're wired like me, we head off some of the best experiences we can have because we're worried too much about the consequences, when we need to just be stepping up to what life is giving us. It's just like, hey, it's like my girlfriend says. She said, hey, take the W, And so I think we have to take the W more often than we are. Those of us that are critical thinkers, and those of us that are worried about what we're going to do to ourselves and other people because we're overly worried about it. I don't know that that's most of the world, but I do know that that's me.
Oh, totally. Totally. And I think that
Yeah,
sometimes
you'll vouch for that.
when you go through some of those situations, I think maybe when you have a point to reflect on your life, whether it's a situation or maybe a relationship that's fractured or something, and you have a moment to really kind of reflect back on, okay, what's just, occurred, and, how important is this person to me in my life? And you have a moment to kind of go, okay, where are we here? And where have we been? And where have we come? And I think in my case, 9 times out of 10, I go, this isn't that bad.
Well, and now I think we get into when you're talking about the split, when you're talking about whether it's the facade or the ego or the illusion or whatever you want to call this thing that's Michael Elliott, this thing that's defined as Jack Hansen. African mythology, and it's called mythology, even though, it may have a grain of truth, more than a grain of truth. A lot of the tribes of Africa tend to believe in a mythology that there are two souls. This is where the notion of voodoo comes from, too. This is where the whole voodoo thing comes into play, that you can resurrect this earthly soul, this sort of secondary soul that's not really as important. It's a little bit more crudely fashioned, and it's designed to kind of be here in this space, but it's attached to this larger, vastly more important soul. And the notion with the whole, like, resurrecting the dead and zombies and stuff is, in that lore at least, that you can bring back this second soul for a little while at least, and it can kind of wander around aimlessly. Not that it doesn't when it's attached, in this, if you're westernized especially, look at Las Vegas, look at Disneyland. But there is that notion out there that there are these two entities that are always sort of coexisting when they're in this experience. And so we examine that notion of this illusion, this ego, whatever you want to call it. And then when we talk about things like we're talking about right now, which are the most pure of experiences, we're talking about experiences that may involve physical happenings. They may involve corporeal goings-on, but they attach to the things that are the most pure and the most progressive that we can imagine in an existential way. Love and hope and, faith and joy. So then when we encounter these experiences, which self are we serving? Are we serving just that self that says, oh, okay, I want to taste Captain Crunch. Oh, okay, I want to have an orgasm. Oh, okay, I want to see Flipper for the 11th time because I love watching him wiggle around the screen. He's so cute and gray. Oh, boy, I love the... Or are we really now we finally found a way to feed the true self, that bigger one that's vastly more important? And do we seek out experiences then, or become more acutely able to seek out experiences that can feed that first and most important, what we might call self, or that entity that resides over this smaller one that's defined by the Social Security Administration as Jack Hansen or Michael Elliott, and that pays its taxes and goes to work and is married to this person and has this many 2.8 children and a stove and a house that's 1,700 square foot and all this bullshit that we measure our lives by, our worlds by. I think so. I'd like to think that's true. And so I'd like to think as we move through this experience, if we're really putting on our best detection equipment, we're looking for a way to find that. And when we do find that, we look for ways to find even more of that, because that's what's truly valuable that we pick up here to take with us. Again, we're not taking any of this. The 2.8 kids, their souls may, be down the line somewhere for you, but they're not going with you.
Mm-mm.
The Volvo that's in the garage ain't going with you. The garage itself is staying here. It's all staying here. Yeah. So what are we taking with us? I think now we're getting into the things we find in our earthly experience that we truly can bag up and take with us to wherever that next Eden is.
This is where the cream is. This is where the meat of the life is, really.
And I'm sorry, Volvo fans, but that is a stinky curd that sinks to the bottom, that Volvo.
I don't care how big your garage is. How much do you make? I really do think that, and there was an article that I ran across talking about this and in regards to philosophy. And one of the things that really hit me was there is no self-center in the brain. There's no self. in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Our pure thought of self, or how it affects anything in life, really is more of it's like a verb. It's only there if you're doing it.
And now we go back to another one of Jack Hansen's pet peeves that we've also, just put a little bit more shinola on. Selflessness. There's no such thing. Just like there isn't really any selfishness, there's really no notion of selflessness that happens either, because we get caught up in both, And I know that selfishness can be so much more easily identified and defined than selflessness, but I think we get off on self too much. I think we're too focused on I'm being selfish, they're being selfless, I'm being selfless. Maybe the dichotomy of those things, maybe the splitting of those two things, into two factions, maybe that binary soul, the notion of a binary soul is a healthy one for us, whether it's accurate or not, just because it gives us some latitude to say, okay, there are two sides to me. They're ephemeral. They only last for so long. Like I said, I want to eat the Oreo. I want to eat the whole damn box of Oreos. I want to sleep with, all 14 of those showgirls tonight. I want to, that stuff. Whereas really none of those things are going to plug into that higher self, that one that really is looking for experiences that are far more tuned to something that's more progressive than that. Because even though all those behaviors may not be regressive, some of them are, I think like drug use. And obviously if you're like, we talked about serial killers at the beginning, if you're a crazed homicidal maniac and you like torturing kittens and stuff, that's regressive behavior. But a lot of those things they don't last, they last for just so long and then they're over. And some of that is just life, but can we find the things that we can truly attach to our eternal selves and identify with in a way that is unapproachable in terms of measuring? I think that's what we look for.
Talking about mental suffering, man, do you know how many calories are in an Oreo?
Oh, God. And what happened to Oreos, too, by the way? Because when I was a kid, I'm a dunker. Okay, I'm not only am I a dunker, but I'm a submerger.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was a kid, I would take my Oreos and submerge them, immerse them in the milk until they would macerate as much milk as possible. I mean, we're talking I'd leave my thumb and forefinger around that Oreo in the milk for 2 or 3 minutes until it was just swollen, distended with milk. And then you eat it because the whole thing becomes this soft, milky, creamy thing. You can't do that with an Oreo now. You can hold it in there for 17 minutes and it's still as hard as a frickin' rock.
Oh, really?
So I don't know what they did.
They changed the formula.
But the last time I even tried to do that, like 10 years ago, it didn't work. And it was sad.
Well, and getting back to suffering, I really think that, if this Oreo is a really good analogy of that, because if we really are taking and absorbing this idea of suffering, screw the calories. If you want to eat the Oreo, eat the Oreo. That's what I say.
But the problem is saying screw the calories enough can also kill you dead and make you suffer an awful lot.
But one
Oreo... Nabisco's
Oreo...
going to profit. They're going to love you.
One Oreo is not going to kill you.
No, one's not going to kill you.
One's not going to kill you.
I don't know what you do, Michael. How do you make... Even me, because it's not like we're above these things at all. I think that's the hardest part of maybe being Jack Hansen, and especially doing this podcast, because it sort of gets pointed out every time we do this exercise, no matter what it is. I want to be more like I imagine, and I want to be a model of some of these things that that are passed on to me from the ether, I guess, that are downloaded from the universe, these wonderful seemingly thoughts of, unity and, all these things that are so much higher.
I think that's self-reflection.
But I can't get around some of the smallest things in my own world as a human. I can't. Internet shopping. It's probably got to be one of the biggest banes of my existence.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
a lot of people, they're online doing all kinds of things. People are addicted to social media. I can't stand social media. I think it's the devil personally, but boy, turn me loose. And the reason why is because I'm a collector and a searcher. And, you talk about a vast wilderness to explore. So you send me out online and it's just like, oh, now we're got to search for this CD, got to search for this record, got to search for this rare clothing piece, these shoes, or, and I'm done. I can't, and it's such a here experience for Jack. And I just wish I could, but then I also remember that Jack, a portion of this experience, as Madonna said, it's a material world, and, you can be a material girl, but you kind of have to temper the material girl shit. I really do feel like you should watch that, because divas, they happen and it's not good.
Material girl ends up with zero bank account.
Well, and they wind up being an asshole too, and we can't have that. And again, going back to Forrest Gump, I'll give you a line from that a lot of lines in that I do like. I don't, like I said, necessarily agree with the whole I think it's both thing in totality. But when he starts to get rich and says, Mom always said that, a man only needed just so much money and the rest was for showing off. And so basically once that threshold was reached, he gave everything else away. That's when the charitable Forrest kicked in, per his mother. That's fantastic. The only thing is where is that threshold? Again, it's probably not the same for everybody, I would guess. But I think it's one that we should all have, because avarice is a real thing. It's a real demon that can trip you up in this experience. And sometimes, again, I wonder if that hasn't happened to me, being the collector that I am. Now, I've been at some of my collections for over 30 years, and when you take a look at them, you go, jeez, how many whatever it is does a man need, Jack? And I ask the same thing of myself every time I look at it. Now, I just go, none of this is going with me. This is not serving. It's really pretty much all just sitting here. I suppose that I could use some of these things, but they really are kind of just there to be there. But I don't really hold I don't hold money in high regard either, because to me, it's incredibly transitory. I mean, it's an instrument by which some people live or die, sadly, but it's also, for a lot of us, just this plaything that we have learned to throw around. And so that's a hard world for me to sort out. That's a confusing world for me to sort out. And it makes sense for somebody that has a couple Aquarian planets in his second house too. So
I don't think some people don't even have a threshold. I think it becomes kind of just a never-ending cycle, and it's madness, because, as speaking to the collector in myself, I would say that, how many records does one person need? Just a few more. That's the answer, right?
That's the answer. Yeah, it's always the answer. Sure. Well, we've talked about this before, and I don't necessarily, we're nearing the end of our time, and I don't want to go down this hole, but, it's just like doing the radio contest that I do the other day where I ask a trivia question. It was World Tequila Day or something like that. And what is the world's most expensive bottle of tequila? The answer is beyond 1980s style. If it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. The answer is $3.5 million. And so I just, again, this is where I give pause and just go, imagine, because there are people that have purchased this. I don't know how many are buying this stuff on a regular basis, but there are people that can afford this, and there are people that are buying it. And I think to myself, I bet you $3.5 million if we translated it into whatever the currency is in Sierra Leone, for example, or Ghana, or, one of these African nations, for example, where it's not appropriate to call it the third world anymore. They don't like that. But where people are literally dying from not having any clean water.
Yeah.
I mean, they're dying. Most of the world dies from dehydration. That's a fact, too. You can ask any non-government sociologist who's not trying to spin bullshit just to, make sure the narrative matches, and, go shopping at the mall this Christmas, kids. Look, the world's population, most people in the world that die every year die from a form of dehydration. They die because there is a lack of clean water for drinking, period. That's it. I mean, that's a fact. So how much clean water could $3.5 million provide?
Right.
And this is where I think, you have to kind of put that Forrest Gump ceiling on things. But the problem is that should start, where does that start?
Yeah.
Is a $100,000 bottle still legit? That's still ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But a world that has a $3.5 million bottle, certainly it's got room for a 100,000 bottle, Jack. Come on. I mean,
well, and how do you put a price tag on a consumable good like a bottle of tequila? And what is this bottle of tequila in? Is it in a glass bottle or
it's? Of course, the decanter is this ridiculous thing it's bejeweled and it's made of platinum and they're not going to scrimp on the bottle with a $3 million.
The bottle itself is probably worth $40,000 or something like that, right?
I'm sure the bottle constitutes at least some of the price tag, but the fluid within is what people are in essence.
Yeah, they're consuming. And so, how much does somebody's pee cost? Or what is the value of somebody's urine after they've consumed said tequila? That's what I want to know.
That's the funniest thing you mentioned, because I remember saying that years ago when we were talking about lobster dinners. My brother and I were on our way to get a lobster dinner. We were in Maine, and so we were going to have actual Maine lobster. And if you know anything about the lobster debate, then, of course, unless it comes from the actual coastal waters off legitimate, speaking of piss drawn lines in the sand, or in this case, the ocean, Maine, it's not a real Maine lobster. Same fucking lobster you can catch in Halifax or fucking Nova Scotia or Newfoundland. It's the exact same fucking lobster. Nope, it wasn't caught off the coast of Maine, so it's not Maine lobster. Well, anyway, we were having Maine lobster, and my brother is one of those people that's kind of given. He's like my father. He can be very taken in by extravagance.
Yeah.
Very quickly, and it can go to his head very quickly.
Yeah.
And he's not lacking for anything. Neither am I. He's worked hard to get what he has. There's that whole thing. I guess I have too, to some measure. But I just remember saying to him when we were on our way to get our Maine lobster dinner, I said, does it not offend you in some way that this Maine lobster dinner that we are about to, that we're seeking out, that's such a big deal tonight, with the whole smorgasbord aside, baked potato and, whatever else it is. And it's going to cost us, it was $19.98, so it couldn't have been that much. But by today's standards, we're talking several $100s a plate, probably, I'm guessing. We are going to ship this out in like 20 hours from right now. I mean, this lobster's literally going to go into your belly, and gastrointestinal juices and acids are going to immediately start breaking it down. Actually, what am I saying? Your saliva immediately starts to break it down once it goes in your mouth, and it's going to do the efficient job of processing it through the Star Wars trash compactor with the little thing with the red eye that no one ever knew what it was, that almost took Luke out. And it's gonna be shit in a day.
Back to the ocean it goes.
And my brother's answer was something like, yeah, but it's sure gonna taste good going down, or something like that. So, again, I think that's a perfect way to end by saying there's a perfect example of two guys sitting in the car with their different souls ready to go eat lobster, with those two different, my bro has got soul number 2 firmly in the passenger seat. He's going to taste himself some lobster. I'll be damned. Doesn't matter how much it costs, how many kids starve tonight. He's eating it, and he's going to enjoy the taste. And I'm, of course, already thinking about it being pooped out and being flushed in the ocean, and how much money I'm out, and how many kids it could have fed. And,
that could explain a lot about you, Jack.
Yeah, that's probably the defining tale of my entire existence right there, isn't it?
I'm getting kind of like Full House vibes from this music.
You gotta love the cowbell, right?
What I need is more cowbell. And why did we choose this song, Mr. Hansen?
I don't know. Because there's a lobster on the cover of this album. So.
And boy, did he taste
by
good.
Appointment of.
Extra butter, please.
Dip. Till the next time.
Until the next time, make sure to leave a tip.
Well, it looks like Jack and Michael have finished up their latest chat about all things existence. But if anything they said got your own Existence Brewing, be sure and catch their other talks at existencebrewing.com and drop them an email to share your thoughts using contact@existencebrewing.com.
Existence Brewing.